Welcome to the Relocated South African, the show for navigating immigration from South Africa for a better future. Obviously, this is becoming a very hot topic given the developments over the last weeks, and I'm your host, Jan Hugo from Lagos in Portugal. In my journey so far on this podcast, I've learned that immigration is challenging, no matter what the reasons or opportunities are. There will be times of difficulty and feelings of loss and trauma. So I decided to ask an expert to share her views on the psychological challenges of immigration. Today I'm joined by Marijke Bruins, a South African-born and trained psychologist living and working in the Netherlands. Welcome, Marijke.
Thanks, Jan. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, it's great to have you. So you're based in Amsterdam. How did you get to move to Amsterdam, having trained in South Africa?
Well, Amsterdam's always been a dream for me. I think from when I was in school, I wanted to move overseas. The Netherlands has always been kind of an easy option because I have a Dutch passport. From my dad's side, he was not born in the Netherlands, but his parents were and kind of left, and he grew up in Cape Town. So he got me a Dutch passport. So it's always kind of opened Europe up for me. Initially, I thought, I was going to come do my master's in clinical psychology here. But because I did my honors at a non-research university, I couldn't get accepted into any master's programs here because it's quite research-based in the Netherlands. So I got accepted into clinical psych masters in South Africa, did my internship, community service there. And then I thought, okay, well, let me kind of network and see if it's possible. And here in the Netherlands, psychology isn't necessarily a protected title. So there's some frustrations I have with it that I've learned over my 8 months of being here. It's great because it allows me with a master's degree in psychology to register with what they call the Dutch Association of Psychologists, NIP. And then I can basically open my own practice and register myself as a business and see clients on a private basis without them being able to claim back from medical insurance, which works out quite well because the medical insurances here, they're super strict on who has access to healthcare, and it's quite prescribed care. So it's almost like if you have this diagnosis, you get this kind of therapy and this many sessions, et cetera, which I think a lot of expats, not only from South Africa, but I think from other countries, find it quite cold and dismissive in some ways. And then as well as the waiting lists being so long. People have intakes and then wait up to a year before they receive help, which if you're struggling, and you need help immediately, it's not really that useful to have to wait a year. So a lot of people end up seeking private care, as well as the fact that a lot of people want someone from their own culture or an expat that has had the experience, right? So I think the private works quite well. I do also work in an international mental health company here, which has been great. I'm allowed to work under a registered psychologist here who's registered with the Dutch system, which I'm unable to register with predominantly because of the language, I think. You need to know Dutch at like a B1, B2, I think, level. If I did that, I could register and then claim from insurances, etc. But yeah, that's how I found myself here, networked with other psychologists who had done it ages ago. They let me know the process. I came over here. There's quite a few South African psychologists that I know that are actually working in a private capacity. So that's been really great.
Okay, that's awesome. I was going to ask, the Dutch part is not there yet.
No, unfortunately not. I'm still very upset with my dad about that because he speaks fluent Dutch, but he decided that my learning Afrikaans in school would be difficult if he taught me Dutch, which I still get frustrated by, but here I am. And then I think moving to the Netherlands, I will say I do have a bit of resistance in myself to learning the language because I don't love the Dutch people, which might sound harsh, but I do think it's quite a cold culture, a difficult culture. And it could be because I've just moved here and I've probably still got one foot in South Africa. So it's making it a bit difficult in that regard.
And maybe not a very welcoming culture. I think a lot of South Africans think because they speak Afrikaans. We were there for 2 weeks when we initially went over in 2020 and thought, oh, well, we should be able to get on. And they don't respond to Afrikaans was our experience in a very short time. But I hear you, it is difficult. Well, excellent. Let's delve into the discussion. So I listened to a podcast in January, a lady by the name of Amanda Voigt, like John Voight, the actor. And she lives in the US in Maryland, and she's a psychotherapist, now become a realtor and expert in helping people settle. And she talked about relocation stress, and she actually started a support group for women in the US. And my sense is just that, that relocation stress is a real thing. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, I think it is, you're moving away from your complete support structure, all that you know, a different culture. And I think particularly when you move to a place with a different language, I think it can put so much stress on you. And I think you're almost in like an alert mode all the time. So you interpret everything as a threat in some way, which I think that's what's happening to me in my mind with Dutch people at the moment, which I think will soften up over time, I hope. But it's 100%, I think, one of the biggest stresses that we can go through in our lives, one of the biggest transitions.
Okay. And if I may ask, you work mostly with expats at the moment in your practice? I know it's early days.
Yes. So actually a lot of South Africans, which I've absolutely loved working with, especially because I started my practice quite soon after moving here and I was missing home. So it was so nice. I know it's a very different kind of relationship and a therapeutic relationship, but it was really, really comforting to interact with other South Africans and have that shared understanding. And then as the time has gone on, I've had a bunch of other people from Sweden, from Germany, from Australia, other clients that are also expats here. No Dutch clients, to be honest.
Yet.
Yet.
They just don't know about you yet. So in that, the relocation stress, and again, I've spoken to people now in many different countries already. And the one thing that also comes through, apart from this relocation stress, and maybe the cause of it, is that people underestimate the challenges of moving. Because there's, on the one hand, I get to, there's this feeling of excitement and then reality. And when you get on that plane, those two things, clash, is my understanding.
I think particularly for South Africans, it's really complicated, right? Because we come from such a unique place with such a unique culture and history that it's very difficult to feel fully understood in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe. And I think when you're South African and you're able to leave the country, when you don't have a South African passport or get a highly skilled migrant visa, which I don't know if they do anywhere else, but in the Netherlands, it's quite common. It feels like you should be grateful and privileged, and it feels like a privilege, which it is on one hand. But then I think the other hand is that there's almost a dismissal of how hard it is because you feel like you should be thankful for the opportunity. And I think that, coupled with really struggling in the move, can be such a difficult feeling to hold in mind, right? It's difficult to speak up about how hard it is because other people almost expect you to be grateful for the opportunity, if that makes sense.
Totally. I always say one of the reasons why I got onto this podcast idea was that Facebook is a good news medium, and it shows the beautiful pictures in front of statues and the various things when people travel, but it doesn't tell the story. It doesn't tell what's behind it. And I think that's probably what makes immigration so difficult. And I think to an extent, and maybe also it's different for Swedes and English people and people not moving very far. It's almost like when you move from South Africa, it's got a finality to it, which I think is really difficult because it's so difficult to go back. It's a 10-hour flight, but it's an expensive flight and you can't just do it all the time. Not like the English and the Swedes, they hop on a plane and it's 2 hours and they're home and they go for a weekend and they see their families. So that finality, I think, does create a level of difficulty. And I mean, a lot of issues, I suppose, psychologically, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. Is that what you're dealing with?
A lot of the time, I think adjustments, I've seen a lot of difficulties with adjustments. So that's almost kind of when you go through a huge transition or something in life, and then you have mood symptoms or anxiety symptoms related to that. So maybe not full blown depression or anxiety, but more of an adjustment disorder, as well as a lot of depression. And I think a lot of imposter syndrome, I've seen a lot with people in jobs here and working so hard to prove themselves almost to the point of burnout, but not wanting to take burnout leave, which is a massive thing here in the Netherlands, actually, because in South Africa, imagine that as a concept.
Yeah.
You work. That's the work ethic in South Africa is insane. So coming into a country where you think that you should push yourself in some way and not knowing when to slow down and being so far away from everyone, wanting to prove yourself as a South African is really challenging, I think.
Just for people who don't know the imposter syndrome, could you give us a 2-second kind of a definition of what that is? Because I think it's quite important.
Yeah, I think being in a place where you feel as though you don't deserve to be there, that you don't have the right qualifications, or you landed this job by pure luck, and there's a lot of guilt for being in that position and a lot of self-esteem issues related to that.
Okay, that's very interesting. And yet South Africans are very highly sought after, accountants and IT people and engineers, especially in Holland. I believe they are highly sought after because they work so hard. But then, the person doing the work, it sounds really, really fascinating. And Marijke, in terms of age groups, because again, I'm asking this because I've spoken to so many people at different age groups, from, young single people, married couples with children, older people. So people experience things in different ways. Is that your sense as well?
That during different phases of their life, they experience it differently.
Yeah, because, often if it's the husband's working, for instance, and the wife is to be at home, that seems to be a very difficult thing. And the guys are working really hard and they're not there to support the wife, and she doesn't have a support structure. So I think that sounds to me like a very difficult thing.
So I think that people in their older age would struggle a lot more because you need the community around, obviously more set in your ways and understanding. And people that are younger are able to adapt more. Also, a lot of the people that are younger move as couples, which I think makes it a lot easier. I'm yet to meet another South African, particularly, that has moved here alone in their earlier stages of life, maybe mid-20s to mid-30s. Most people have moved with a South African partner, which I think makes it significantly easier. And I think a lot of the older people that move have either moved for children or safety reasons, not really liking the state of South Africa. So I think that there's a different mindset in the older generation. Whereas I've also noticed the younger generation, it's maybe about working and earning money here and then seeing Cape Town as an option to go back and retire in or work later on in their lives in, because they can then afford a house there with euros.
Well, that's very true. There's a couple on one of the episodes that after 9 years in Ireland, having kids there and Irish passports, they've gone back to Cape Town now. And that was always their plan. Whereas a lot of other people have not made plans beyond leaving. And I sometimes think that's important, because if you think you'll go back, you'll start thinking about going back. So there must also be a lot of that kind of thing of doubting your decision.
Most definitely, not knowing if you're ever going to settle, ever going to fit in. I think people underestimate how long it actually takes. I'm really struggling at the moment, noticing like I've been here not too long, but I think, and not that it can compare, but the first move I made was from Joburg to Cape Town in my early kind of from school to university. And it took me a long time to settle in Cape Town. So I'm kind of riding on the fact that it took me about 2 years to feel comfortable after moving there. So I think 2 years is almost the minimum to give yourself here. And I think a lot of people do end up giving up before that.
Yeah. And the Netherlands and the Dutch people not being very welcoming, people then have to rely on other expats for friendships and community, because that's an important part.
Which I think is so great here in the Netherlands, that there's a massive South African expat community. I live down the road from a South African restaurant. Whenever I'm in the shops, I hear the South African accents everywhere. It's actually crazy how many South Africans there are in the Netherlands that you can connect with, which I think is really important. But then again, at the same time, you don't always want to find yourself moving across the world and only interacting with South Africans. I think it's important to expose yourself to the culture, open your mind to meeting people from different places. I think that helps you settle in a bit more.
Yep, absolutely. And I guess people at work who work with Dutch people are more fortunate. Maybe people with children meet people at school, in that way, and not just reliant. I think, again, it just seems to be different in different places. In Australia, obviously, massive South African community, massive Afrikaans communities, and they hang together and it works for them. But that sense of community, especially initially, seems to be a really, really important thing, because that being lonely and being uncomfortable are not very nice places to be.
Exactly. And I think also moving, depending on what time of the year you move, it can be very different. I mean, as you know, in South Africa, we don't experience extremely harsh winters. And you move to the Netherlands in particular, because the weather here is really horrible. I say that, though, spring has been great to us, but I moved in October and I went from winter to winter, and I don't know how I made it through. I thought that it was never going to end, but the short days, leaving the house in the dark, coming home in the dark, I'd never experienced that before in South Africa. I mean, not to that extreme degree. And the cold was horrible. I think that makes it also really difficult.
And you cycle everywhere?
I do. So cycling in the rain and the cold. I was thinking, I was so excited to leave South Africa so I can appreciate cycling to work and being outdoors. And yeah, I'm just wishing I could get in my car and listen to music and put my heater on and drive 2 kilometers and not cycle 2 kilometers.
I can just imagine. Yeah, everyone does that. It's in Holland, it is quite different. At least it's flat, so you don't have to do hills.
Exactly. That makes a massive difference.
The one thing that's also come out, and I'm sorry, I'm using that as examples because this is why it fascinates me. The one thing that everybody says is support from family that people miss. Having a grandmother that they can call if a child is sick, or just having that close support. That seems to be a massive thing for South Africa.
I think support, I mean, South Africa is a community-based place, right? It's all about Ubuntu, having people around. Whereas I think in Europe, it's quite individualistic. People are here for themselves and for the benefit of themselves. That's not what we're used to in a way. And I think people who have children here and realize how expensive child minding is, getting care for that, not being able to call their mom to come and look after the children. It's really difficult, not being able to have support for children when you want to do anything as a mom. I can only imagine how hard that is. So I think that that's one of the biggest things for people starting families. Yeah.
That is certainly, my children live in Ireland, and when their little boy got sick, it was a nightmare, because the grandmothers are just not around the corner. So it was difficult and they have to work and so on. So yeah, I have full appreciation for that. The other question that also comes up is the reasons why people leave. a lot of people are pushed by bad circumstances, crime, house invasion, others by opportunity. And do you think those people who have different reasons for leaving have a different mindset when it comes to immigrating?
I would say yes. I think that people who leave South Africa with a hate about it because of what has happened to them in some ways, I think that they'll be way more focused on making it work here and appreciating everything around. Whereas other people who maybe leave for opportunity, they might miss more the open nature, the multicultural aspects of South Africa, the friendliness of the people, like sit with I wish I could go back. I wish I could live there, but I know that it's probably better for me to be here, rather than kind of denying all good about it, which I think often people who leave because of crime end up doing, is creating a polarized view in their head and maybe idealizing what Europe has. But then later on in the line, actually struggling with it.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid comment, is that as they live there and they experience things that they didn't expect and that utopia doesn't exist, then it becomes difficult, because that's kind of the other question for me is, one says some people move for a better future. That's what I call my podcast, Moving for a Better Future. But is it always a better future? That's a question. But it's so individualistic, because every person has a different reason for doing what they're doing and so forth. But what about doubts? How would you deal with your patients who start experiencing doubts? Because that must be also a daily occurrence.
Well, I think, like you say, the grass is never greener on the other side. That's the reality of things. And the way that I kind of practice as a psychologist, I would never give anyone advice or tell anyone what to do, right? I've never walked in the shoes of another person. What I try help my clients, my patients think about is to make decisions in the right kind of way. I think sometimes people make a decision based off of impulse or of feeling uncomfortable about something, and they don't really think about the decision they're making, which I think can lead to a lot of regrets. Whereas you can make a decision in the right way, even if it's the wrong decision. So you can think about it where you're at, think about both outcomes, what it feels like, what you think about that. And then later on in the future, if you realize that it was the wrong decision, at least you can hold on to the fact that you did the best that you could with the knowledge that you had at that time. And that, I think, can leave you with some sort of solace. So I think with doubt in people's mind, we sit through the decision. What was the reason they moved? If the decision wasn't made in the right way, what does that feel like? How do you prevent that in the future? What can you do now?
That's such great advice, because I think it just proves again the benefit of talking to somebody like you if a person sits with that doubt, because very often the South African ego doesn't like to admit that maybe it was a mistake at some point. So being able to talk to somebody to reason through it in a logical and correct way and then get to a decision. As you say, you make the right decision, or the right decision process, whatever the outcome is.
And doubt is so normal, right? I think that we need to normalize having doubt or having difficulties. That when you deny it, it kind of grows into a bigger monster inside, or you don't speak about it or don't think about it. But just like in relationships, I think a lot of the time people deny. I see some couples or I see some individuals who are having relationship problems, and they never want to ever admit to thinking, was this a mistake? Whereas I think those are important questions to always ask yourself in life, right? That you go through those waves of, do I want to be with this person? And then you think about that and maybe even grow a stronger relationship. But it's so important to ask yourself these big questions when they come up.
Yeah, I hear you. And in terms of the role that psychotherapy can play, I almost get the feeling that when people are even thinking about immigrating, they should start the process of testing themselves. Would you agree with that? That's never too early to start.
Never. I mean, I really, really believe that therapy is a privilege and a necessity. Well, both, in both, but a necessity for people. Unfortunately, it's a privilege because of the cost and everything. But it just helps you think more about yourself, more about the way that you are in the world, about unconscious patterns, about why you're making the decision to move, for example, what it means to you. It helps you sit with those big questions, which maybe you don't always want to face. And as well as having the support, right, from someone who listens, doesn't judge, doesn't have any agenda, that I think that that's really important.
Absolutely. I think that's so valid. And just in terms of people's coping strategies that are now there and finding life difficult, one is obviously support groups. Do you think there's a lot of merit in joining Facebook groups and support groups of other expats?
Definitely. I think especially the South African group on Facebook that I see that a lot of the times people organize braais or get-togethers or offer advice and help, that I think that that's really helpful. I don't think that there's any expat support groups in the Netherlands. Maybe that's the gap in the market.
Now, I was going to say that lady in America, I can send you the link to that podcast. I think she already had 300 ladies on a group or something. I mean, it's big. So maybe there is a gap. My view is there is a gap, even if it's group therapy as opposed to individual therapy, but, just guiding people in coping strategies.
I think that definitely there's not many groups in the Netherlands that are available, and especially for people who have moved, and maybe even just South Africans. That I think group therapy is such a wonderful place, right? That sometimes it's easier for other people to point out things to you, to offer support so that you don't feel so alone. So definitely something to think about.
Okay. I certainly believe. And I mean, one of the other questions that I think South Africans may also battle with sometimes is financially, that they underestimate the cost. And again, it's different, for different people, but guys who go with good jobs and good salaries is one thing, but other people who may not be that fortunate and have to start relatively fresh, it's difficult. And that causes a lot of stress.
I think it's really expensive here. Some people, I think a lot of the highly skilled migrants are quite lucky because they're usually coming on the 30% ruling, which I don't know the details of too much, but I know it's like 30% of your salary is not taxed, which is a massive difference because the tax here is huge. Minimum wage is livable, but I think that the accommodation here is so hard to find. Especially, I mean, I think one of the places that's like the hardest thing about it is when you're renting through an agency, you need to have bank statements, you need to have a job contract, you need to earn 3.5 times more than what the rent is, which is if you're just moving off the bat and you don't have a job to start off with, how are you ever going to prove that? And then you're looking for a room in a house if you're by yourself, which is exorbitantly priced, and a tiny room. And coming from South Africa, it's a huge adjustment.
I think it's massive. And, the saving some rands and coming to spend it in Europe is not easy. Luckily, we've been here so long, we don't think in rand terms anymore. But sometimes when you get visitors and they see what things cost and they convert it back, that's what a cup of coffee costs. And I think, oh, my goodness, it is expensive if you're thinking in rands. But the finance, I mean, must be also a difficult thing to cope with and can cause stress, I assume.
But what I do find is that the groceries here, relative to what you earn, are not so much more expensive than what the groceries have become in South Africa relative to what you earn.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, as I said, we've been away so long that we have no idea of the inflation in South Africa, but it does seem like it's also become quite expensive to live there, especially around Cape Town area where we were. And okay, I think we're kind of getting to the end of it. If you have to say to somebody, the reason why I'm asking this, quite a large part of our audience is still South African, people who are living in South Africa and considering immigration. So I always think, what advice would you give somebody who is thinking about leaving?
Right now, it might change in a year for me. It is early days that I'm here, but definitely the grass is not always greener on the other side. There are huge benefits, I think, to moving. But I think that when people move, you need to hold in mind how difficult it's going to be. Because I think if you're prepared for how difficult it's going to be, rather than denying the fact that it will be difficult, which I think a lot of people tend to do, there's excitement, there's, oh, I hate South Africa, nothing works, I just can't wait to leave this place. There's a denial of what luxuries we have in South Africa, actually, in terms of space, in terms of people around you, the weather. There's a lot of privileges that we have in South Africa and luxuries. So don't take that for granted, for sure, and know both sides, know the benefits and the positives. So I think a holistic thought about the moving process is definitely necessary.
Very valid. And maybe do as much due diligence about the place that you're moving to as possible so that you don't get too many surprises.
Yes, I would definitely visit a place before you're moving there rather than just something that you imagine would be good. But I think it's so important to explore the places, know a little bit about it, get a feel for it before actually leaving.
Yeah. And just living in Europe, I mean, South Africa is far from Europe, so it's not that easy to travel for everyone. Are you finding in the 8 months that you've explored a little bit around Europe?
I've been to London, and I mean, I've been to London before I moved here, but I went to London and I went to Paris and I went to Belgium and I went to, no, only those places. But I think it's because I've been in survival mode. So I've been working a lot. I was quite fortunate. I mean, when I moved here, I didn't move with a job. I didn't move with a partner. I just moved by myself. And I was really fortunate in the sense of being able to find a job quite quickly, not only in my private practice, because that obviously takes time to build up, but I found a job with a stable income relatively quickly. I found an apartment relatively quickly, despite the fact that I didn't have a contract. So I was really fortunate. But before all of that fell into place within the first 2 months, I hated it. It took me a while to adjust, and I've kind of just been in survival mode, trying to settle and find the right balance between work and life.
Okay, well, from my point of view, I think it makes you perfectly qualified to talk to other expats, having experienced those difficulties and not giving up and carrying on and pushing through, because not every day is going to be perfect. That's a given.
No, I think it's hard. It really is. It's such a difficult experience. Not to say that it can't be wonderful after a while and you can't want to live here forever and really adjust into it. That would be amazing too. But it is hard and there's no denying that.
And I mean, let's close with this thought, but when it's really difficult and it's tough, what, as a psychologist, what would you say to a listener who's really going through a tough time now?
Reach out to family and friends, to people that feel like home. Ask people to come visit you. Make a home cooked meal that feels like home. Remember the reasons why you decided to move. I also thought when moving, which has really helped me, a lot of the time people think about bringing maybe just clothes or things like that. I think what's really been nice is bringing sentimental things with you. I mean, I brought my coffee mug, which I drank out of every day in South Africa, that feels like a bit of home. Small, special, sentimental things are so important to bring, to have those comforts, even pillows, because comfortable ones are hard to find here, I think.
Okay, well, I think that's absolutely amazing advice. I really want to say thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey and your work to date in the Netherlands. I think it's inspiring and eye-opening, the discussion. And may I say, if you want to reach out to Marijke in Netherlands, she's got a website, Marijke Bruins, psychotherapy.com, and it's spelled MARIJKE psychotherapy.com, where you can get all her contact details. Thank you so much, Marijke.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was a great conversation.
If you enjoyed my discussion with Marijke and would like to hear more about the experiences of South Africans who have left for a better future, why not subscribe on your favorite platform? Or if you want to share your own story, contact us on relocatedSouthAfrican@gmail.com. Until next time.